Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to session 103 of the Harmonic Islamic Study Circle, HISC. Again, thank you for those listening that are sharing this journey with us. Just a very quick recap. Today's session is going to be a slightly shorter session. We're just covering or picking up on those things between the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud that we haven't essentially covered. And then, inshallah, next time we will start with the Battle of Uhud in its, from its very conception through to the preparation of the army, the setting off, the Muslims, finding out about it, the Muslims camping, and then looking into the actual battles, the first part of the battle, and then how the tide turns, and the eventual outcome of the battle, and then spend some time looking at the lessons that we can learn. It's generally accepted that this was a defeat for the Muslims and a victory for the Quraish. On certain metrics, that's true. But there are scholars who actually turn it around and say that actually, in balance, this was a victory for the Muslims. So we'll look at these different aspects, inshallah, over the coming weeks. But today, as I say, there's that interim period between the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud, which happened just over a year after the Battle of Badr. Last week, we completed the expulsion of Banu Qaynuqa and some of the lessons that we can learn around how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with different people. We've talked previously about issues and correcting the myths around anti-Semitism amongst the Muslims. We spent the majority of the last session talking about the killing of Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, who was born an Arab, but his mother was Jewish and the father was from one of the Arab tribes and adopted into the Jewish tribes. And then Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, he was vehemently against the Muslims. He was one of the chief propagandists against the Muslims. He openly attacked their laws. He entered into secret pacts with the enemies of the Muslims like Abu Sufyan, and then he started writing lewd poetry, and whatever he would write would trend. It would be at the forefront of the media war against the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ asked if anyone was able to sort this problem out, and Muhammad ibn Maslama and Abu Naila, they made a plot to take their weaponry in the dead of night, and they managed to overpower Ka'b. So we talked about that last time. So this time, again, just a few short battles and instances, and again, this sets the scene around some of the prelude and the build-up and the necessity for Uhud. And again, just to recap, the Prophet ﷺ, when he would participate in a battle or expedition, even if there's no fighting, that's called a ghazwa. And a Seerah is where he would dispatch his Sahabi on a specific expedition or mission. The first one that we've briefly mentioned before is Karkara Qudr, and this is where Banu Saleem, which is one of the sub-tribes of the Ghatafan tribe, which are one of the major tribes in Arabia at the time, and they were well known for their banditry. They wanted to launch a surprise attack, and they were arranging 200 armed people to attack Medina within a week or so of the Battle of Badr. And the Prophet ﷺ, he got news of this through his intelligence agency, and then the Prophet ﷺ launched a preemptive offensive against Banu Saleem. And then when the mushrikeen of Banu Saleem, they saw the Muslims, they basically fled. I mean, originally the plan was to take the Muslims by surprise. The Muslims would not be expecting this, and they would be able to perhaps even rout the Muslims from Medina, and if not that, certainly send them a message around how displeased they are that their Banu Saleem's trade routes have been interfered with because of the Prophet ﷺ and his operations in terms of disrupting the Quraishi trade links, which are obviously the lifeline, economic lifeline of the Quraysh. So these 200 people, they basically fled, left all their tents, their animals, their belongings. So much so, it said that the Muslims had 2 camels each in terms of the booty, those that went against Banu Saleem. And another aspect of this war that is chronicled is that one of the first people they found was a slave called Yasser. They captured him. He then converted to Islam, and the Sahabi who had him captured, he then presented Yasser to the Prophet ﷺ as a gift, and the Prophet ﷺ, as he always would free the slave. He'd never keep any slaves for himself, but Yasser, as a new convert, remained with the Prophet ﷺ as his servant, and that's how the Prophet ﷺ operated, by setting the example personally. And again, we see the Prophet ﷺ after battle staying for 3 days by the camp where they'd chased off Banu Saleem, and then they would come back. And the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that Allah supported him, by igniting terror in the hearts of his enemies. So just when the enemies of the Muslims would see the Prophet ﷺ or know of it, their hearts would be filled with terror, and we see this happening on many occasions. The next instance to talk about happened a couple of months after the Battle of Badr. This was Safwan ibn Umayyah saying that basically he'd started plotting and planning and trying to see how they can seek revenge. So links were being made with some of the hypocrites, the people that they knew were sympathetic to the Quraysh in Medina, and some of the Jewish tribes. And part of this interaction, this clandestine interaction, Abu Sufyan was trying to build these links, despite the fact that there was a peace treaty in Medina, and people couldn't be party to that. So it's documented that Abu Sufyan felt a lot of guilt around the Battle of Badr, and certainly there was a lot of social pressure against him, because it was his caravan that he took to Syria and brought back from Syria that was the cause of the Battle of Badr. He's the one that wrote the letter to the Quraysh to say, your caravan is under threat, come and defend it. And on the back of that, the Qurayshi elite came, and again we've talked about how they were decimated because of the Battle of Badr, even though later on Abu Sufyan said, look, go back, the caravan is safe. But he obviously carried this huge guilt around this whole episode. Added on top of that fact, the Qurayshi elite were all killed, added to the fact that his own son was captured. He refused to negotiate with terrorists. He refused to enter into any dialogue around the ransom with the Prophet ﷺ. And on the back of that, we talked about how grieving was banned in Mecca. He, in his bravado, made a pledge that he would not rest, he would not take a bath until he had avenged the blood of Badr. So, he's made this public pledge. He's not going to have a bath. So, days go by, weeks go by, and obviously things get quite difficult for him because he's painted himself into a corner. So he has to try and find a way out of that. So he then approaches his Jewish friends in Medina, Huyay bin Akhtab, and we talked about Huyay before in terms of he had that conversation on the day that the Prophet ﷺ entered into Medina or into Quba, and they recognized that he was the prophet that was promised in their scripture. Yet he would not follow the Prophet ﷺ out of pride, out of nationalism, out of pure racism, thinking that his Jewish tribe is better than the Arab tribe where the Prophet ﷺ was sent. So Huyay, and this is a couple of months after Badr, he rebuffed the approaches of Abu Sufyan. Again, Prophet ﷺ was in a very stronger position post Badr, and we talked about how he dealt with Banu Qaynuqa, within a few weeks of what happened at Badr. So then Abu Sufyan couldn't go there, so then he reaches out to Salam bin Mashqam, who was chief of Banu Nadir, one of the other major Jewish tribes, and we'll talk about Banu Nadir inshallah in a month or two. Now Salam bin Mashqam, he gave him a full account of everything that was going on, the whole situation, and helped Abu Sufyan prepare a raid against Muslims. So what they did essentially was, late at night, again, they didn't have the honor or dignity of facing the Muslims in the daytime or openly. They dispatched a small group of men to raid one of the outskirts, one of the suburbs of Medina called Al-Uraid. And they were just there to cause fuss, essentially. They needed to go back to their constituency and say, we've done our bit, we've fulfilled our pledge. So as part of that, they started burning some palm trees and chopping other trees down. And then they came across a couple of Muslims, and they killed these Muslims, and then they took to their heels. So Prophet, he got obviously early word of this attack, quickly gathered all his men, and they set out on their sort of horses and camels, and they galloped out to where Abu Sufyan and his raiding party was. They'd seen the Prophet come in the distance, so then they felt that they discharged their duty, and then they started to run away. But the Muslims were gaining on them, so then Abu Sufyan or the leaders of the party were basically saying, look, let's jettison any excess baggage or luggage that we have, and they had a lot of provisions. For this long journey in the battle. They didn't know how long it was going to be, so there's a mixture of barley, sort of porridgey, honey, nuts stuff mixed together, and this is sort of a long-lasting food that doesn't go off when it's made like that, and it's called as-Sawiq. And so they had bags full of as-Sawiq, so that was weighing them down. So they cut off the ropes to the as-Sawiq, and then they managed to escape, and then the Muslims couldn't catch them up, and they just gathered up this sort of dried porridge. Hence the chroniclers have called this the Battle of as-Sawiq, because of this porridgey food that they left behind. Another one to talk about is the Prophet ﷺ. Again, he led some Muslims, about 450 horsemen and footmen. He'd got, again, more early warning intelligence reported to him that a couple of tribes, Banu Thalaba and Banu Muharib, they were gathering troops, and they were going to raid the outskirts of Medina. So you see a pattern here of other tribes testing out the strength of the Muslims and trying it on, trying to see the weaknesses of the new nascent Islamic State. They may have proved themselves against the poorly prepared Qurayshis, but how are they in terms of with other tribes? So the Prophet he set out with 450. He left Uthman ibn Affan as the person to take charge of the affairs of the Muslims in Medina in his absence. Again, thinking through all of these things, and then on the way to Dhi Amr, they captured somebody who then became a Muslim and offered himself up as a guide to the Muslim army. And again, as the Muslims then approached Banu Tha and Banu Muharib, they hurriedly dispersed into the mountains. They again were stricken by this terror once they're sort of seeing the Muslims, and then the Muslims they'd then camped by a watering place called Dhi Amr, and they essentially stayed there for nearly the whole of Safar. So 3 to 4 weeks they just camped at this place. So this is beyond the 3 days, and they would use that as a staging post to reach out to the surrounding desert Bedouins in that area. So again, 450 strong army is a very powerful and strong, capable army, and it sends out a significant message. And this is the message that the Prophet ﷺ was then using. He was using that as a forward base to project his power and his reach into other newer areas. So he would dispatch people, they would negotiate, and they would explain what Islam is, try to convert people or tribes or travelers, and if not, enter into allegiances or alliances with these other people. So for the whole, nearly the whole of the month of Safar, they are in the Amr. And so we can learn that these Siraya and Ghazwa, they have lots of benefits. It takes time to prepare, we said. It takes time to travel and to fight and to camp, to recover and then come back. So it's not a quick smash and grab raid that happens in a day or two. These are proper expeditions. So some of the objectives of these things, or the byproducts, are the fact that now you've got the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabi who come from very different backgrounds. They come from trading backgrounds, shepherding backgrounds, or agricultural backgrounds. They're not people of war. Generally, the people of Yathrib, Medina, the people of Mecca, they've not fought wars, and it's true what Banu Qaynuqa had said, right? That part of it was true. So these people who have not grown up in this environment of warfare, of having a military mentality, or having an army, a professional army, they need to be exposed to different types of military training. So this training, these expeditions, these wars are hands-on military training. And on top of that, it helps people sacrifice, prioritize, and in itself, the fighting is ibadah. Anything around jihad fi sabilillah is an ibadah. On top of that, any preparation that Muslims make for the jihad carries the reward as well. So this is combining those elements of hands-on, first-hand exposure to these things, military training, learning these new arts and skills, as well as being ibadah. On top of that, this is an ideal opportunity for tarbiyah, where the Sahabi would spend day and night with the Prophet ﷺ, and well-respected Sahabi. So, if you really want to get a measure of a person, you need to see them during travel, right? Or when you're away from the comforts of your own environment. You do get a sense of who people really are. And then the Muslims who are accompanying Prophet ﷺ, this is an ideal opportunity for tarbiyah and learning Islam firsthand. And then it also teaches Muslims to be part of a group, part of the ummah. This is a collective ibadah. Okay, they're learning these aspects of social norms, of operating within a group. So even though there may not be the specific objective of defeating such and such an army, you can see why the Prophet ﷺ and the other Muslims invested so much in the early days in these campaigns, because there was a lot of benefit from them. A couple of other things to mention. There's the invasion of Buhran in Rabi Ath-Thani in the third year of the Prophet ﷺ. He led about 300 warriors to Buhran, which is an area in Al-Furu, and they stayed there till Jamaat al-Ullah. No fighting actually took place, and the Prophet ﷺ, he again used that as a staging post to reach out to the other tribes, project his authority, project his reach into different areas, just to show his presence. And this is part of establishing themselves, as a political and military entity. So it goes hand in hand with the project that they're undertaking in Medina. And these are necessary adventures that need to be undertaken. In one of these expeditions, there was somebody called Dhi Thor, and the process. He's going on these. They're camping on the journey. It's been some sort of light-ish rain, and process. His clothes are wet. Everyone's tired, so he hangs his clothes on the tree, puts his head down, and gets some rest. Puts his sword by the tree as well. One of the leaders of one of the sub-tribes, Dhi Thor, he creeps up through the Muslim camp, gets to the Prophet ﷺ, and then grabs his sword and stands over the Prophet ﷺ and says, "O Muhammad, who will protect you from me?" So he's holding the sword and he's standing over the Prophet ﷺ with a sword in his hand. How much malice he had in his heart, Allah knows best. But then all of a sudden, Prophet obviously wakes up, sees Dhi Thor standing over him with a sword. All of a sudden, Dhi Thor stumbles back and falls on his floor. Obviously drops the sword, because this was a very unexpected thing that happened. And the Prophet, he then got up, picked up the sword and stood over Dhi Thor and said, "Oh, Dhi Thor, who will protect you from me?" And when just going back, when Dhi Thor said that, the Prophet replied, "Allah will protect me." And obviously Jibreel was the one who pushed Dhi Thor. He fell back, and the Prophet had that confidence about him. Later on, Dhi Thor then he was taught Islam. He became a Muslim, and then he went back and he started preaching Islam to his tribe. The other main battle that we need to talk about, this is a Seerah where the Prophet was not part of, is the one led by Zaid Bin Haritha, and this was essentially the one that made up the resolve of the Quraysh that they have to do something about the Muslims and the trade routes. So essentially, with the summer approaching, that's when the people of Makkah, their caravans of trade go towards Syria. And we've talked before how dependent the Quraysh are on these journeys to the north to Syria and to the south to Yemen and Abyssinia essentially. And if you cut off one of those pipelines, it affects your ability to do trade on the other side, because you buy things from the north and you exchange them down south and vice versa. And so if you've blocked off the route north, then that really makes it difficult. And the Prophet, he'd sent the Saraya of Abdullah bin Jash south of Makkah to say, look, we can strike you south of Makkah as well. So they're creating a very problematic issue of trade and survival for the people of Makkah. And this is encapsulated in what Safwan ibn Umayyah said. He gathered all the Quraysh. So Safwan, the son of Umayyah bin Khalaf, who was the slave owner of Bilal, and the one who obviously one of those who was killed in Badr, he gathered all the Quraysh and he said, look, Muhammad, he's blocked off all our passages. Okay, they can't go north, south is difficult. And then if we take the sea route, and that's a different potential way to go by sea, he says that's difficult because most of them already have given their allegiance to Muhammad and are following their religion. And if we stay here, we won't be able to go on a journey, and our money will dwindle to nothing, and our life depends on these cousins. And so the interesting thing there is that you see that what Safwan is admitting to and reading between the lines is that there was active dawah from the early Islamic State reaching out to these other critical areas and tribes, and it wasn't just pure economic allegiances and ties. It was a whole system approach, and primarily they want them to become Muslims, and they can see what the Islamic State has to offer them, and they're now becoming Muslims. So it's making the problem more acute for the Quraysh. Where do they go? Do they go north? Do they go south? They can't go west because all the coastal tribes and areas have started giving allegiance to the Prophet. So they realize that this is actually could be an existential threat to the survival of the people of Makkah. They have to do something about it. So in one of the meetings, one of the elders says, look, the way to handle this economic blockade, it's not an ideal one, but perhaps we should explore the trade routes going across the Najd to Iraq. So they can't go north, they can't safely go south, they can't go west. How about they go east and they take a really long route round and then join onto the trade route. But this is probably 3 or 4 times the journey length. And again, it's going through the desert route, so it's a completely different route. And again, they're not that well traversed in that route, so they'll need special guides, they'll need special provisions. So that was suggested. So they made preparations for that. So they thought that they could outsmart the process. Then one of the chaps, his name was Naim bin Masood al-Ashja'i. He one evening got drunk in one of the public houses in Makkah, and he's boasting whilst being drunk that they've managed to outwit the Prophet ﷺ, and they're going to get their trade routes. And a person who was nearby who was listening was Zaid bin Nu'man, and he overheard this. So he's and this is again before alcohol has been prohibited. So he's sitting with Naim and he's discussing, and he's getting all the intel. So how many people are going, where they're going, when they're leaving, what route are you going to take? So Naim didn't know that Salih was a secret Muslim. So Salih took all this information and then immediately dispatched and went to Medina and gave this information to the Prophet ﷺ that this is what they're planning to do. And because it's such a circuitous route, it was a huge bounty, and it was very lightly guarded because they thought there's no way the Prophet will get wind of this. But the Prophet, as I say, he dispatched Zaid Bin Haritha to get the caravan, and they took the mushrikeen by surprise in a place called Al-Qarda, and most of the mushrikeen, they fled without a fight. They're not going to risk their lives over this, and then they carried back silver, wares, gold, that amounted to some say 100,000 dirham, right, which is a multi-million pound booty in today's money, and this again was distributed by the rules, 4/5 for those on the expedition and a fifth set aside for the Prophet ﷺ and the other groups. So, because of this, we see that the Quraysh are in a really desperate situation. Now that they've lost all of this wealth, they've really got nowhere to go, north, south, east, and west. How do they survive? So these are essentially sort of the prelude to the Battle of Uhud. The Quraysh, they're having to think, we really now need to decide on what to do. They can't survive like this. It really needs to be open warfare, and they have to try to make up for the Battle of Badr. They've got to be seen to do something that gets around the problems that they have. They can't be seen to just sort of dwindle into non-existence because of the military and economic might of the Muslims. So they then decide that we have to go to war against the Muslims again. So from early on, they start plotting their revenge. And all these other battles, they increase their resolve around what needs to be done. And Abu Sufyan, because he was the one who traded the original caravan, he knows exactly who got what as a result of that initial trading expedition, and he basically calls in the chips, and he's going around with some of the children of the deceased former leaders of the Quraysh to try and whip up public support for avenging what went on, and to try and open up their trade routes. So we see that there are four principal reasons, and we'll cover these again in more detail next time, why the Quraysh felt that they had to militarily do something against the Muslims. This was unsustainable. There was the religious reasons in terms of now people have had to make their choices, and you see that from both sides. The monotheists, do they go with the Jewish people, or are they becoming Muslim? And then you've got the polytheists. They're becoming hardened in their animosity to the Prophet ﷺ and to Islam, and they can't see rhyme nor reason. And then there's the social pressures that have been building up, not just to avenge the death of their loved ones that they lost during Badr, but they'd also lost their elites, their leaders. And this was a huge embarrassment for the Quraysh. I mean, how could they lose literally the whole tier or strata of elite in one go? and this was a big shame for the Quraysh. And then you had the other prominent people wanting to specifically avenge, the deaths of their fathers, Ikrimah ibn Abu Jahl, Safwan bin Umayyah. They all were, bloodthirsty for revenge, for the sake of revenge. And we just talked about the severe mounting economic reasons behind a rematch, because Medina, that sort of intersects the caravan route from Mecca to Syria. That's been blocked off. The route to the sea is being blocked off, and the slow chokehold on Mecca is taking place. They can't double back. So this was, as I say, an existential threat for the people of Mecca. They had to do something about it. And then now there is the added reason that the Muslims are a political threat. The Prophet is now a real threat to the Quraysh, a physical and political threat. And the young Islamic State is growing. More and more tribes are giving their allegiance to Islam. They're seeing the benefits of Islam. They're seeing this new order being set up, a new way of doing things, governing by laws, breaking down these tribal barriers. And this is attracting people. It's one thing hearing the Prophet talking about the benefits and the bounties that Allah will bestow on people if they follow his route. So there's one thing in practice, in theory, when the Prophet and the Sahabi are talking about how wonderful life under Islam is going to be, i.e. the kingdom of God on earth. And then there's another thing to see it in reality. Now that the Prophet is in charge, he has the political authority to put these rules into action and to create this society that he's been preaching about. And people are saying, actually, we like that, we want a piece of that. And it's when they see Islam in action that is, that is the best counterbalance to all the propaganda that is still ongoing from the Quraysh and the other tribes against the Muslims. They can easily counter that by showing, well, this is what Islam's about. Look at the society we've got. So you've got all sorts of people there, and how they are living. So again, for these reasons, there's that sort of perfect storm gathering where the Quraysh have to do something about it. So inshallah, next week we'll talk specifically how the Quraysh went around to the different tribes like the Kanana and Tihama, and they're trying to get other allegiances and their efforts in terms of getting other mercenaries to support them, and then they march out to Uhud, and how the Prophet finds out about it. So inshallah, we'll, as I say, start that next week. In the meantime, do remember us in your du'as, do pray for the ummah and all of those people who've lost their lives in unfortunate circumstances throughout the ummah. And again, it's just under 6 weeks to Ramadan. So again, it's time for us to start getting into the zone, increasing our ibadah and our closeness to Allah to try and get the most out of these bounties that Allah gives us. So inshallah, talk soon. We'll finish there inshallah. Bismillah. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.